and welcome to Talk This.
It's dangerous to podcast alone.
I'm your original host, Madelyn. So I'm 2 years older.
Oh. I'm your funky fresh host, Emma?
Emma, I was setting you up for the episode topic.
Oh, right. Okay.
And thanks for tuning into this side quest, where I really tried to just set up that we're going to be talking about sequels.
I was just very confused by that, that's all. I didn't get it initially, and then I couldn't get the response from there.
I wasn't sure if it should be original or number one or first, and I don't think any of those would have cleared it up.
I don't think so either.
Firstborn. But then that you wouldn't have known to be like, I'm the sequel.
You could have just said, I'm the first installment.
I thought about it, but that's weird. I don't like that either. So this week, it's my turn to lead our side quest topic. And I decided, in light of certain media discourse about non-video game things this week, that I wanted to talk about video game sequels and what makes a video game sequel good and different kinds of ways to approach making a sequel and all that stuff around games number 2 through 7.538 Final Remix. And all games in between. It probably comes as no surprise to you if you're someone who's plugged into the world of people who care about things that could be categorized as nerdy at all.
Yeah.
For which
or even not at this
media.
point. Yeah.
If you pay attention to culture.
Yes.
You might have heard that this week, Star Wars, The Rise of Skywalker.
I hate that title so much.
The Rise of Skywalker!
I really don't like it. I don't have much stake in Star Wars. I have not seen The Last Jedi or The Rise of Skywalker, but I heard when that title was announced, I was like, oh god, that's an awful title.
They're all corny. I mean, it's definitely tonally aligned with every other title in the series.
Yeah. It just
Attack of the Clones.
It felt a little bit like and from what I've read about this movie as a whole, it felt a little bit like a prod at the prior movie. Just knowing what I know about The Last Jedi.
Fair enough. So this week, The Rise of Skywalker was released.
Yes.
It's no doubt making millions of dollars as I blink.
Yep.
Not to mention the fact that we've all been saturated by Baby Yoda memes from spin-off? Well, how would you refer to The Mandalorian?
Spin-off or side story, maybe?
Other Star Wars media installment on Disney Plus, The Mandalorian. So it's just been Star Wars City on the Twitter discourse.
It really has.
Both wholesome and not.
Uh-huh.
And so it got me thinking about sequels and what makes a good sequel. And how do you satisfy everybody? You don't, I think.
Yes.
It's the answer to that one. I'm going to throw that one out there right there. But, specifically about video games, because I feel like making a video game sequel is a much different beast than making even the similarities between a movie sequel and a book sequel, for example. I thought it would be interesting to discuss what makes good sequels, given that the only game that I play is Kingdom Hearts.
Yeah. In comparing it, I think it's more, at least from the sequels that I know of, it's more similar to book sequels than movie sequels, because I feel like in movies, like with Star Wars, you get a lot of times when it will be passed from person to person in charge of it. Somebody will make the first movie, and someone will make the second movie, and someone will start making the third movie, but then get fired and replaced by the person who made the first movie.
What a classic staffing dilemma that I'm sure has happened on multiple large franchises.
I'm sure it has, honestly. But in the case of video games and books, it's usually the same person in charge,
For the most part,
it feels that way.
Talk to the folks at Telltale Games right now, but
Sure. Obviously it's not entirely the same team, but it is being worked on.
No, I know they've brought back a lot of the same people.
It's worked on by a company that was founded by Telltale people.
Sure.
Basically.
No, I know.
So that's at least like the least scummy way to do it, I guess. But before we dive wholesale into that, like, and I don't actually know also if this is, like, actually true across video games, but you at least hear of, like, the director, right? And in games it feels like that director goes across games.
Definitely, I think when you have a game that's successful, it's certainly much more likely that your studio is going to survive, and that you'll get to make the second game.
Yeah.
That said, there are plenty of sequels. You know, we talk all the time on the podcast about games that started off being developed by one company in the 90s, and they made their original trilogy.
Sure.
And then some other company picked up the IP several years later, and then made, like, a reboot trilogy, or picked it up from there, or something like that.
Yeah.
So it definitely does happen in games that you get different people, and frequently as I was about to say, as controversially as in the Star Wars case, but is there anything as controversial as this last trilogy of films? We're not going to get into it.
Yeah.
Emma and I don't have opinions.
Yeah, I mean, we're not, like, legally allowed to have opinions until we have seen the movie, probably.
I haven't even seen episode 3.
You mean...
Revenge of the Sith.
Oh, I haven't seen any of the prequels.
Yes, you have.
No, I haven't.
You might not remember them, but I'm sure you've been in the room while they were watched.
Definitely have not.
Anyway, prequels is a whole other can of worms, which maybe we can talk about a little bit later. Because the video game prequel is certainly also a common occurrence, as we all know and love. But I thought it was interesting. So, like, anxiety about sequels in video games is a thing that goes, relative to game history anyway, way back. I found a couple of New York Times articles about, from 2005 and 2006, respectively, talking about how game sequels were basically, you know, not only are they driving all the sales of the industry, but they're, like, killing creativity in the industry, basically. And all these, like, independent developers complaining to the New York Times about, like, yeah, like, companies won't even pay attention to us. Like, they won't even look at IP if it's not Harry Potter or Madden or attached to something that already exists. It's like, it was interesting, because in some ways I was like, wow, like, this really, like, it, like, kind of predates, like, the Steam era, really. Yeah. And so it was interesting to read this thing from, you know, just, yikes, I guess 15 years ago.
Yes.
That was so much, like, sequels are, you know, 8 out of the top 10 selling games on any given month, more or less. One time, the game that wasn't a sequel, the only one in the top 5, was a little game called Halo, which would then, you know, succumb to sequel after sequel after sequels,
yeah.
Which I thought was funny. Bungie was like, yeah, like, it was a risk. Anyway, I think it's Bungie. Look, my boyfriend was making fun of me. It was like, you said Bungie over and over and over again.
Bungie. Here we go, a Bungie.
Come on. But it was interesting to read these takes from 15 years ago. People just being like, it's all sequels. EA controlling 25% of the market. EA. I wonder if that's still true.
It's probably still true, Madelyn.
Okay, maybe, but okay.
EA owns the Star Wars IP, so
it all comes full circle. But it was interesting to see all of this anxiety about sequels that, in some ways, I think we've kind of moved past. Right, the industry has broadened enough and created storefronts for which indie developers can break through that sea of sequels and create individual games that are not tied to existing intellectual property. Yeah. And original games like that. So now we just get to, you know, we don't have to worry like, oh, are sequels killing the industry in the same way as I think with like movies, for example. Like in the movie business, at least the sort of mainstream movie business, it's just like everything is a sequel. Yeah. There's not.
But also not a sequel at the same time.
Whoa! What does it even mean? Everything is a sequel or it's a reboot. Or it's Marriage Story, apparently. Even that is based on something, right?
Is it based on? It's sort of
like his life, I guess. Yeah. Anyway. So unless it's like an indie film with Adam Driver. It's based on something. But in games, that feels so much less true. I mean, obviously, maybe this is just because I am so not plugged in to the yearly sports game.
Uh-huh.
I am so not plugged into the, however, every couple of years Call of Duty kind of release. And maybe it's just that, other than the fact that I will give Tetsuya Nomura all of my money for any number of Kingdom Hearts that he sticks after it. I'm not that plugged into anything that releases sequels on a semi-regular basis. But it feels like that worry of sequels just completely squeezing out any kind of creativity from, is it, like, can you refer to anything as double A? Like, can you refer to a double A game?
Yeah.
From, like, the kind of, like, double A to supported by a AAA thing space, just did not come to pass.
I think it's interesting that you call those sequels, though. Like, I don't think of the yearly sports releases as sequels.
Right, so,
and something that's sort of unique to video games, and again, like, you could probably find examples in other media, but there's a lot of franchises.
Yes.
I guess, that have various releases that are sort of all themed, I guess, around a certain type of story or gameplay system or whatever, that aren't sequels but are together at the same time, right?
Yeah. And I think that's why video game sequels are either often, like, completely trite and unnecessary. Sorry, Madden fans. I get it. I get why you would want the most up-to-date. I cannot imagine buying it every single year, right? I enjoy a good FIFA. Don't really feel like I would need to buy more than one every console generation.
Yeah.
So why it explains to me why, like, the broad category of sequel, right, can include things that are so formulaic and cookie cutter, and we've just updated the roster, or we've updated the weapons, or we've updated whatever, or things that are so completely creative, different, innovative on what they started with. There's such a wide variety of what sequel even means.
Yeah.
But I think you're right to distinguish between, and I was talking about this in my notes, there's, like, sort of 3 different types, I would say, right? I would say, like, the thing along the lines of, like, the sports game thing is, like, I almost don't want to, it's a franchise, right? But it's just a very different kind of franchise than, like, for example, like a Grand Theft Auto,
right,
or an Assassin's Creed, although those are actually kind of
those
direct sequels, some of them.
Yeah.
Or, I don't know, like a Halo, Call of Duty. Like, even though, like, to me, I'm like, oh, Call of Duty, we've just picked a different war, basically. It's not, like, I think, like, the kind of sports iterations, not to discredit the hard work of those development teams and the innovations I'm sure that they find for gameplay and quality of life and that kind of thing. But they do very much feel like, this is just our yearly edition.
Yeah.
We've updated the roster, and we've cursed another player to a season-ending injury by putting him on the cover.
Yeah.
I think that's so, I don't want to say funny, because these people obviously go through immense pain and, like, difficult times, but, like, what a wild thing. Is it just that everyone in football has a season-ending injury every season?
I mean, all sports, there's always a good chance you're going to have a season-ending injury, you know?
I know. So yes, we have that variety of sequel, which I am almost not interested in talking about. I think it's amazing that Madden and any of those games continue to make the just gadzooks of money that they make.
It's an easy game for, like, if you're hanging out with da boys or da gals or whatever.
No, da boys in this case is a gender inclusive term.
Okay.
Like, you like, your boys.
And you pop in the latest
is
edition
more about the relationship,
of FIFA, right? And
yeah.
You play a few rounds because it's fun and easy and people can understand it.
I guess enough people feel like they want to get a new one every year, but it's just like, is the audience for that just so big that even though only like 20% of them are maybe buying it every year, like, on a given year.
They make a lot of
still
money,
make a
so
ton of money.
It's like lots of people buy them.
I guess they mostly make money on, like, they make a ton of money on microtransactions now too, don't they?
I don't know.
The online stuff.
I mean, probably.
Yeah, they do. I'll answer it for you. They do.
Are they by EA? Then yeah, probably.
It's just so fascinating to me. I don't think there's anything in movies that is. In books, there definitely is, like, equivalents to that, right? Of things that the person ghostwrites a book every year and it comes out and it sells pretty well.
James Patterson.
I was thinking of James Patterson. Exactly what I was thinking of.
I can't believe James Patterson is the FIFA 2020 of authors.
And yet, here we are. So yeah. So there's that, but I don't have that much interesting to say about that, except, like, it's wild that you can make a game that is so similar year in, year out, and it still makes a ton of money.
I'm sorry, this is such a sidebar. Do you remember the Maximum Ride book? That was just, like, a really obvious...
But eco-terrorism or whatever? Yeah, they're, like, saving the earth.
And I was like, but what about the plot lines? James Patterson? And he's like, no, global warming.
He tried to warn us, Emma.
I know he tried to warn us, and I do thank you for that, James Patterson.
He didn't do it. Whoever ghostwrote
They
that
didn't.
book.
At that point, at least, they weren't putting the ghostwriter pretty prominently on the front cover. So it was more James Patterson.
Speaking of garbage sequels. Okay, so we have those. Then we have the franchise sequels, which, again, it's like all of these articles and things and all of the lists of best sequels of all time lump these together with more, sequels in the line of what sequels to novels and sequels to movies frequently are. We have the franchise sequels, like I said, like Grand Theft Auto, like, I mean, anything where the story doesn't tie in, like Burnout, like Final Fantasy, that's a great one. All of those, where even though maybe they exist in a shared universe, true in Final Fantasy? Like, do we think it's all one big
I don't think so.
Universe at all? No,
I don't think so.
How are there Moogles in all of them then? Answer me that.
Moogles are a universal constant, as are chocobos.
You literally just said they were universal, and it doesn't all take place in the same...
multi-universal constant.
Multiversal.
There you go.
There we go. I've coined a new word. And then we have actual sequels. So, like The Last of Us 2 is coming out, or the Kingdom Hearts series, if we can say that those all take place in the same universe, which is maybe not so clear anymore, is it?
They do. They take place in the same universe.
Just in 200 different timelines.
Yes, exactly. Timelines are different than universes.
Let's not get into timelines. But into games that actually have a story that carry forward from game to game.
Yes. You have consistent characters that do things and reference back to events and stuff like that.
And in some ways, those I think are the rarest kind of video game sequel. Even though they're the ones that I would actually categorize as sequels. Just relative to the incredible bulk of these franchises churning out games.
Yeah, I guess so.
So it's interesting. There are also, though, ones that definitely kind of... And there's ones that are kind of like in the middle ground of that, too. Like The Legend of Zelda, right, has some that are actually direct sequels, and some that are just, like, sort of in the same world, and some that are not related at all.
There's three. I watched a video on breaking down the Unraveled video on it, so it was only half serious. But the 3 different timelines of The Legend of Zelda that somehow all coalesce into Breath of the Wild. Somehow.
There's some way to track it through Ganon, right? Isn't it something like that?
Well, the 3 timelines originally break off. This is fascinating. Into Link stays as a child, Link becomes an adult, and Ganon defeats Link. Those are the 3 timelines. And then somehow Nintendo just gave up and was like, Breath of the Wild is at the end of all 3 of these timelines.
Right, because he fell asleep for a million years.
Yeah, but also that doesn't make sense, Nintendo.
And will Breath of the Wild 2 be a direct sequel?
It looks like it will, at least.
So that'll be interesting as well. But yeah, a lot of the really critically acclaimed ones are kind of actual direct sequels, or at least sort of. Half-Life 2 regularly on lists. Assassin's Creed 2. Looking forward to actually playing that one. Assassin's Creed 2. 1 was okay. Too long, in my opinion. Kingdom Hearts 2 often ranked as better than Kingdom Hearts 1. That's a thing that actually kind of spawned me thinking about this sequels thing in the first place, is that I think video games, more frequently than any other medium, have sequels that turn out to be better than the original.
I mean, it's because there's so much more there, right, to work off of. So, like, in movies or books, generally your sequel is just expanding and progressing the story. Whereas in video games, you're actually getting the chance to refine a combat system, right? Like, you tried something out, it was cool, but it had some, parts so that you could work it out or make it better. And then in the sequel, you can actually do that and be like, here's a refined version of this combat system.
So as someone who knows a little bit more about development than me, I have a question.
Okay.
So I was just, like, reading some conversation about stuff online, and some people were like, yeah, like, they've already built the frameworks. They can just, like, take that, and, like, they've already done it, so they don't have to, like, work on that anymore. Like, they don't have to build, the physics engine, for example. It's just like, okay, dude, like, everybody's using, like, Unity, so, like, chill out.
Yeah.
But is that the case? Is part of the reason the sequels are better that we can oftentimes just, like, take stuff we've already used and bring it into the game?
I mean, it's not a matter of, from my understanding, it's not a matter of, like, copy and pasting code over from one game
really?
to the
Because that's
other.
what Game Freak did.
It's not like you just hit Control-C, Control-V,
Game Freak
and,
alive!
Sora will move around in the world just like that. But having experience in something and having already worked on something, yes, like, that's helpful in moving on to something where you're working on something similar, right? Like, if you, learned how to sketch, for instance, and then moved on to another type of art, like, your sketching would probably help you because you're able to do basic circles and stuff,
Yeah.
So, yeah, you can build skill sets and you'll have that sort of reference too. Yeah. But it's not a matter of, like, oh, I took this game and put it here and now I will edit this, because that just becomes a huge mess if you do it that way, I'm pretty sure.
Do you think the reason that sequels are often, more highly acclaimed in video games is that we have lower expectations for story there? It seems like a lot of the time we talk about sequels, right? We were just talking about a sequel, like, last week, right? Basically. Where we could just plop Rico wherever we want to.
Right.
And even in those games, which the name is completely escaping me right now.
Just
and that's
Cause.
Thank you. Just Cause.
Just Cause, yeah.
Yeah, like, even in Just Cause, even though those games were not particularly well reviewed ever, right? The second game was a little bit better reviewed than the first. But not seemingly for any story reasons, just because we could do cooler things with helicopters and jumping on things, and the grappling was better.
I mean, that comes down to different priorities, right?
Sure.
And I think Just Cause is, like, a weird example, because I don't really think there's any, like, continuity storyline, right? It's just that it has Rico.
No, there is. He
things.
Goes after his old boss.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Who presumably has betrayed him. I don't know. I didn't do that much research for fear of you being like, Madelyn, too much lore.
But I think there's a difference between, like, I feel like I could pick up Just Cause 4 and have a good time.
Oh, but you could pick up Avengers 3 and still have a good time too.
I guess so.
Not eventually. Of course, you picking up just Endgame and just seeing Endgame, you're gonna lose a lot of the emotional impact and stuff. And you're not gonna follow along. But for a lot of kind of, franchise movie sequels, they're also designed that you can jump in at the third one and still be, more or less understand what's going on.
That's fair. But to answer your actual question, I do think it just comes down to differences in priority of those kinds of games. So I'm not sure Just Cause is a great example, I guess, because it's like Mission Impossible, the game, right? Not the, like, you don't want a somewhat engaging story in Mission Impossible, but mostly I feel like you're going just to see how beat up Tom Cruise can get himself, You know, like, what is Tom Cruise doing this time? Oh, dangling from a helicopter? That's kind of tame.
But
Tom
see, I
Cruise.
feel like Mission Impossible is sort of a little bit unusual for movies in that way. Normally, if you have a movie sequel and you do like the same kind of cookie cutter plot, but you just change the location and the filming is a little bit better, right? You're gonna get, if not slammed for that, at least dinged, right? Whereas I feel like in a video game, that's more or less the formula for a lot of these things.
But the key is fun, right? How much fun are you having?
That's true.
If you have the same cookie cutter plot and you put it in the same location, but it's fun and zippy and shot well and, you know, it's pretty, like, there's a good chance you'll have fun with it and it'll be fun. And in games, that's even easier because you can make it so that you actually doing the fun things, right?
Yeah, that's true.
So it's not quite, you know, we keep comparing it to movies and books and stuff because these are things that also have sequels, but there's more elements to consider in a game, basically.
Word.
Don't say that ever again.
Okay, I will not say that unit of speech.
Okay, good.
Ever again.
Lovely.
That combination of letters.
Lovely.
Yeah. So, do you have a favorite video game sequel? Think about it, I guess.
I don't know. Go look at my top 15 games on
wow.
Twitter.
Hyping your own Twitter instead of answering my question.
I mean, it's interesting because, like, I would say that my favorite, technically, favorite video game sequel is, like, 358 over 2 days.
Right.
358 days over 2, excuse me.
Wow.
But that's not necessarily, like, it's important to know the context around it, but I don't necessarily like that as a sequel, right?
Yeah.
I like it as its own unit and thing, and the stuff around it enhances that experience, but at the end of the day, it's pretty self-contained in itself. I mean, I guess I really like Ace Attorney Investigations 2.
Uh-huh.
Because I think it takes some of the interesting things from the first one and actually wraps it in an interesting story, I guess. Mm-hmm. And that happens to be both a sequel and a spin-off, so that's an interesting little nugget there. Because it's not part of the mainline series of Ace Attorney games, but it's a sequel to the spin-offs of it.
Nice. I realized in thinking about this episode that I have not played that many games that are direct story sequels.
Yeah.
That I play a fair number of games that could be, considered franchise sequels. I mean, any number of Nintendo franchises I have played various entries in, right? Mm-hmm. Even though none of those really connect. I don't know. Would you consider Pokemon games to be sequels? That would be funny. Like, you named yourself the same thing in each one over and over again.
Yeah, you could just be like Ash the Undying,
Yeah, exactly.
So I guess that's up to you. But no, they're not. I mean,
really
I know they're
not, but still, you could almost retcon it together so it works.
There's an interesting number of games that I really like that are, in a timeline with another game that I've never played, too. Like, I really like Crisis Core, and that's a prequel, and I've never actually played all of Final Fantasy VII.
Right, yeah, I'm super enjoying Yakuza 0.
Yeah.
And have not played any of the other games.
Yeah. That game is pretty designed that way, I think.
Right, and it's a prequel, so,
yeah.
I don't have to know any of the timeline to follow along, but still.
And in Crisis Core case, like, I know a lot of what happens in Final Fantasy VII, despite having never played it,
Emma, don't spoil. Be careful. Be careful. There are people who haven't played the game.
I don't care. Come on now. Come on, spoiler culture. We know what happens in Final Fantasy VII. Not some of the more specific things. There are some more specific things about Cloud that I did already know going in. But Aerith dies, okay?
Oh, Emma, come on.
Aerith dies.
There was no need.
She dies. Maybe she doesn't in this version.
Maybe you will be able to cheat code save her.
Probably the first game of it, does not get to the point where she dies.
Right, so we won't find out about it till like 2027.
It's not. They're already
the 5th installment of this 1,000-hour game.
I bet it'll be 3 parts.
And see, that in itself is interesting. Now, also, like, if we were releasing a game in parts, in how do we consider it? Especially a game like Final Fantasy VII Remake, where it's like fully a game length each installment.
Yeah. So this is a whole other topic, but I think that,
Classic.
you know, game pricing needs a bit of an overhaul, and I think some of this is a bit of a reaction to that. Like, you could make all 3 parts of Final Fantasy VII Remake and put it out on the PlayStation 5 because they probably wouldn't fit on the PlayStation 4. But then you would be selling all of that for just $60.
Yeah.
And, like, how much game is that going to be? Like, 200 hours total? You know? And is that a fair price to put on something that gives you that much? Like, open world games that you can play for 120 hours. Should those only be $60 when games that are like 20 hours are also $60? You know?
Well, that's another thing that's interesting about sequels in video games, as opposed to other media, is that they can totally, not in addition to having the possibility of just saying, we're going to take the gameplay that everybody liked and just make it better, they also have the ability to totally change. A lot of very prominent sequels lately that have taken games that were not like as open world and turned them into these giant open world things. Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, Red Dead Redemption 2. Also in the video game category of the sequel that came like a decade later.
Red Dead Redemption was pretty open world. I mean, it's,
yeah, but
it's
this
Rockstar.
is so much bigger, is all I'm saying.
Well, yeah.
That's all. Is like expand, like getting, and that one you're right. It's just more of like expanding what it was. But realistic peeing. No, that's Death Stranding. That's the wrong game. I'm sorry. But it felt like something that Red Dead
not
would
realistic peeing because you can just do it whenever you want, but he also doesn't need to. So it's just peeing for fun, basically. So that's not realistic.
It's Emma's review of the game.
It leaves mushrooms behind, and if you find other people's mushrooms, you can like them.
Nice.
Yeah, if you pee on the mushroom, it gets larger.
Oh dear. I'm gonna move it. We're gonna put that aside. But yeah, there is the way to kind of genre shift in a way that I don't really feel like you see in like a book series as much, or in a movie series. Well, when
these
except in like a explicit spin-off.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because these franchises are so old.
Yeah.
Right? Like, stuff like this has been going on since the dawn of video games, you know? Whereas usually with, like, I mean, you know, I guess there's Star Wars, which has been going on for a very long time. But, you know, like, this trilogy itself has only been up in the course of, like, 5 years. Whereas stuff like The Legend of Zelda has been around for 30 or 40, and I'm not going to do math. And so right now, I think you see a lot of these revitalizations because they're like, oh God, the industry is moving ahead without us. We can talk about this on our Games of the Decade list, but, you know, Final Fantasy 15 did it first before Breath of the Wild, just saying.
Look, I wasn't saying Breath of the Wild was the only one to do it. Just saying.
Just saying Breath of the Wild gets a lot of credit just because it did things better.
But we also sometimes have things with story. Like God of War is actually a storyline sequel, even though it also kind of functions as a reboot. Yeah. Which is, first of all, like just like a wild line to walk. Yeah. So like kudos there.
I mean, whatever criticism or whatever you want to lob at God of War for being like another dad
story for dads.
Yeah. It is interesting that there are two perspectives of like, you can go in as a new player and you're basically playing from Atreus's perspective, his son's perspective. Or you go in as someone who's played the original trilogy and you're playing from Kratos' perspective. So it's a matter of like, you either know what Kratos is struggling with here, or you have absolutely no idea how to understand this incomprehensible man. And that's sort of the Atreus perspective. Yeah. So I think that at least is a clever way to balance the reboot versus sequelness. And I do appreciate that they're at least trying to comment on the older games in that way.
Well, it's a line you feel like we have to see some of these kind of long-running but not crazy regular franchises walk, even more in the coming years, unless we see a major shift towards backwards compatibility in the coming generation, which I suppose is possible, but I am not holding out hope for.
Well, the Xbox Series X...
That's not a console. I mean, we don't talk about the Xbox Series.
seems to be indicating good compatibility. And I will say the Xbox Game Pass is really impressive.
Yeah, Xbox has always paid much more attention to that. I'll give them credit for that.
And the PS5 will at least be compatible with PlayStation 4 games, but seems to be indicating that it will also be compatible with older games.
That's wild. If I get to play
we'll
Team Buddies, I'll give them however much money they want.
We'll see. I wonder, I don't know if it'll actually be like you could pop in a disc, or if it'll be like you could download something that you could previously only download on the PlayStation 3.
Mm-hmm.
But either way, it will be more accessible than the PlayStation 4, at least.
But I do feel like video games have an interesting line to walk there, of frequently being in the position, well, not only of, because I feel like any media has the possibility of somebody walking in who hasn't seen your setup. Right? So on some level, you're always having to give people the tutorial level and like teach them the game and explain to them why you're trying to find the 7 lights or whatever, at least a little bit, even if you're never going to follow, right? But games, unfortunately, have that handicap of sometimes, like, literally these players cannot have played the first 3 games in your series unless they want to track down a console that's 4 generations old and costs $300, $400 still.
Yeah. I mean, the bigger franchises with direct sequels have always been porting their games up and up and up.
Of course.
You can get Kingdom Hearts, the story so far, for, like...
$2.
Yeah. Not $2, but like $12.
Yeah.
Now you can get like, how many is that? Like 6 games and 3 movies for $20? That's insane. I'm not plugging it. It really does seem insane to me.
That's just bonus money, right? Those games already sold well enough in their first run. Yeah. This is just like cherry on top, icing on the cake money.
Yeah. But games like that and God of War and stuff like that have always brought their games up, especially since like God of War is like a special PlayStation exclusive thing now.
Yeah.
So they're interested in keeping those brands alive.
Well, I'm excited for, hopefully, since God of War did so well, both critically and commercially, for that to be more of a trend of ongoing stories that also like actively welcome in new players. Just as someone who was pretty dormant on the game scene for a good half a decade or so, when a lot of these like very storied franchises were getting started, I would appreciate having games that are made for me, the adult, that don't force me to go back and play 60 hours of 3 games that are 12 years old.
Gotta put Metal Gear Solid on my backlog.
Yeah.
The Metal Gear Solid collection or whatever.
Another question for you.
Okay.
What do you think is the best numbering convention for video game sequels?
What does that even mean?
How would you, if you were making a sequel series, how would you do it? Would you do it with numbers? Would you do it with just different titles?
I mean, I'm kind of fond of subtitles, right?
You would be, sure.
It just, in general,
I'm just kidding.
It feels a little bit more creative than just sticking 2 or 3 on something. But in terms of, like, sympathy for the grandma who has to come into GameStop and be like, my kid wants the newest whatever, to just be able to say the number and not have to remember the subtitle. So maybe you put the number, but also give it a subtitle just for extra flair. Like Uncharted 4, Thief's End. Perfect.
Yeah, clear and descriptive.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just think you have to pick one and stick to it. Looking at you, Square Enix.
Well, to be fair there, I will not defend the recent announcement of Bravely Default 2, because because that's
makes no sense.
I started thinking about it, and I was like, okay, it's like Final Fantasy X, Final Fantasy X-2, Final Fantasy 11, right?
Yeah, but that's dumb too.
That's not dumb though, because that one's clearer actually, because once you understand that each one isn't connected, by saying X2, you're aware that that's a sequel to X.
Yeah.
Right. So with this, it's like Bravely Default, Bravely Second are the same characters, and now Bravely Default 2 is going to be new characters. It's
that's
a little.
Not... You're really reaching there. You're stretching pretty hard.
Once you think about it, you can make it logically make sense. I'm not saying that it's good. And the crazy numbering of Kingdom Hearts is a little weird, but I'm not totally against the idea of having, like, the big ones have the numbers and the smaller ones have the subtitles.
I've said this before on the show and in life. I'll say it again. It is this naming system that gave us all these people in their reviews being like, we've waited 13 years for this.
I mean, that's fair, but it also would have been weird for 358 over 2, 358 days over 2 to be called, like, Kingdom Hearts 4.
Well, the problem is that they jump all over the timeline.
Yeah.
Right? And that's
if Birth by Sleep was called, like, Kingdom Hearts 6 or whatever.
Well, that's why none of them should have had numbers. There should have been no numbers.
Fair enough, I guess.
That way there's like a level playing ground, and you don't hamstring yourself when you decide that you want to put one between 1 and 1.5 and have to do, like, pi over 2 or anything like that.
I mean,
that
at least
between 1 and 1.5. That's embarrassing. I sort of
like, you get the distinction between the numbered entries in the side games, though, just because that's the side games are where Nomura's like, here's some gameplay system I've been thinking about. Have fun, kids. Whereas the numbered entries, like, sort of have the same layout, you know?
I guess so, but imagine a universe where you didn't refer to any of them as the side games. Worth it, right?
I guess so, yeah. The smaller games.
That's not even true, necessarily.
Well, they are. They're smaller.
Dream Drop Distance is not smaller than...
Is it not? Really? It's like 15 hours.
I don't think...
That's
I think
smaller.
It was longer than that. I don't know. I spent like 5 hours just fighting stupid Zemnis over and over again.
Fair enough, I guess. I do, like... there feels like there's so few of them, but there is something joyful about having, like, a huge spanning saga like this, though, that I kind of appreciate. I just started Trails of Cold Steel, which has, or will have, I don't know if the 4th one's out yet, but it will be 4 games, which is interesting to think about in terms of, like, making a series like that. I don't know.
Yeah, there are not that many like super spanning story sagas, which makes sense, right? Story for games, as I've said before on the show, began with The Last of Us. It's the first time there was a story in a game.
There was literally no story before The Last of Us. There's no such thing as
story in games before The Last of Us.
That's still so funny. People said that when, like, Heavy Rain came out, too. It was like, wow, Heavy Rain. Games can tell stories.
There's also there's a lovely little Onion article that I came across in researching for this. It's about the 10 greatest video game sequels of all time. It's worth checking out. I totally missed in the first Assassin's Creed that Alan Alda narrated every action that the player's performing. They must have turned off that function. It's cool that they're going to take that out in Assassin's Creed 2, though. Mm-hmm. Yeah, all sorts of stuff. The Pokemon one is sort of correct, so by talking about the daycare. Uh-huh. Anyway, maybe I'll put this on our social media this week, because it's pretty funny.
The Half-Life 3 at the end. Come on, The Onion. You can do better than that. I mean, maybe this was published before.
It was before the Half-Life VR announcement.
But still, like, that joke has been old for, like, a decade.
That's the point. So yeah, Emma, any final closing thoughts about sequels, and should they or shouldn't they? Games you wish had sequels, games you wish didn't have sequels?
When will there be Half-Life 3, Valve?
When?
When is it coming out? Why are you incapable of counting to 3, Valve?
Can you even play, like, the original? I guess you can. I see them at GameStop for, like, $3 every once in a while.
Oh,
The
yeah, I'm
original
sure
ones.
it's still around. Yeah. You can play them on Steam, probably.
Oh, that's real.
I don't know. I can't really think of any that I was like, oh, man, I wish this didn't have a sequel, you know?
Didn't have a sequel?
Yeah, that was one of the questions you asked.
Yeah, it was.
And games I wish did have sequels. Again, I don't really have one.
Wii Sports for Switch.
It's not a sequel.
I would like a Wii Sports 2.
So you've got Ring Fit Adventure now. That's Wii Sports.
I know it's not Wii Sports. It is not the same. I cannot play it with friends.
You could.
I don't think it's multiplayer.
Somebody could have it strapped to their leg, and somebody could do the.
That would be teamwork that makes the dream work. I'm gonna make Josh do that when he comes over.
Oh, I guess I want The World Ends With You sequel. I really don't want it to be Kingdom Hearts 4.
They're gonna show up in the DLC. Just you wait. Do you consider that to be a sequel? Like,
no.
It's just an addition to the game.
No, I don't consider that to
Even
be
if it's going to tell a story that takes place
sequel.
potentially after the game?
Well, I think it's just I don't consider it a sequel because it's not really explained where in the timeline the Dream Drop Distance stuff is happening.
Yeah.
In terms of World Ends With You.
Yeah.
Ignoring Kingdom Hearts entirely. Like Persona has these spin-offs called Persona Q that's basically like happens in the middle of everybody's stories, and they go into like a weird dream-like coma and have this adventure, and then they forget all about it and go back into their normal story.
What about Persona Dancing in Magic Moonlight or whatever?
Only Persona 4. Persona 4 Dancing All Night is a sequel.
That's hilarious.
The other two games don't have story modes. They have like conversations with the characters.
So
but
what?
There's not actually.
It's just them like dancing.
Yeah,
that could be a sequel.
Except they're somehow in like the places that shouldn't exist anymore. And also, spoilers for Persona 3. Some of those people are dead, man. You know?
Or are they?
They are.
Yeah.
In Persona 5 too, you can get a Ketch is dead. He died.
Oh, that's true. Well, that's probably not gonna hold.
I don't know.
There's no way he could stay dead.
I won't say Persona 5 Royal spoilers, even though I've looked them up.
That's not cool.
I was curious. I'm not gonna buy it. I was curious.
I'm gonna buy it.
I'm not gonna say anything. That's what I'm saying. I'm not gonna say Persona 5 Royal spoilers. I'm not gonna confirm or deny that they did anything different. I was just curious about how
they did nothing different. Can you imagine? I buy the game and it's like, congrats. It's the same.
Well, I was looking up to see how different it was. That's all. And I determined that I did not need to buy it.
Yeah, I'm gonna make.
And that's my answer.
It's gonna be our maybe. We'll see if I can talk Josh into it. But it's my tentative hold for
great.
Next boyfriend.
I'm very excited for that. I'm very excited.
Oh, he's gonna hate it.
Yeah, I'm sure he is. I'm sure he's gonna actually despise it.
He's really gonna not like this game.
I feel like they just like the collective unconscious sometimes over there in Japan. Like a lot of games.
I wasn't even thinking of the young stuff.
A lot of games I've played that are some sort of like mystery element or supernatural element are like the collective unconscious, and every time they bring it up, I'm like, pour one out for clickbait boyfriend.
Yes, every time anyone says consciousness, I just do a little like, ooh. Just in general. Now it's imagination. That's the clickbait boyfriend update this time. Yeah, I'm trying to think if there are any sequels that I want.
I want Yoko Taro to make another game. It doesn't have to be in Nier. I just want him to do something.
Yeah, sure. I still haven't finished Nier.
I know you
I haven't
haven't.
played any more in Nier. Oh man, so many games to play, Emma. Like a Three Houses sequel. They just all bop around.
They all bop around.
I'd like a Fire Emblem Three Houses dancing in
It'd
Starlight.
be very hard to make a Fire Emblem Three Houses sequel. You have to pick which one is the canon timeline.
Well,
right?
it's like a Half-Life thing. Your choices carry over.
Oh, I see. That would still be very hard to make. That doesn't change it. That makes it harder to make.
I didn't say it made it easier.
Fire Emblem has done direct sequels before, and some of them are set on the same continent. So they are technically sequels. Awakening is technically a sequel to the first Fire Emblem, because they're technically on the same continent.
You're really enunciating. You seem to have strong feelings about this.
It's just fun facts, you know? Doesn't matter at all, but it is happening. But Path of Radiance and Radiant Dawn are actual sequels.
Radiation.
Where I think your choices do sort of carry over. In terms of, like, who you did supports with, some of them will matter.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, folks, thanks for listening to another episode of Talk This.
It's Dangerous Podcast, Long.
Have you ever played a video game sequel? What a dumb question. Of course you have. It's literally not possible for you to have not played a video game sequel if you've played 2 video games.
All video games are part of one shared timeline.
Oh god, don't do it. Don't do it. But do you have a favorite video game sequel or video game, like, series of sequels that you've played? Do you have a game that you wish had a sequel or you wish didn't have a sequel? What do you think is the secret sauce to making another version of a game that people already liked okay? And why do you think that video game sequels are often more acclaimed than their original... Could not think of the word. Their entries. Mm-hmm. Original entries. If you've got thoughts on that or anything else about the episode... you should hit us up on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Talk This Podcast, and we're on YouTube at Talk This Sisters. While you're there, you can also read our thoughts on video game stuff, and keep up with new entries on our website, www.talkthispodcast.com. Where you can read all about the show, the games that are in the hat, check out like links to the episodes, and also our blog, where you can see long-running series, Clickbait Boyfriend, where my boyfriend is playing through Kingdom Hearts 3. Just as a warning, the next one is going to be the last one until the DLC for Kingdom Hearts, which is crazy. I've been writing that blog for more than 2 years.
Yeah.
Wild.
And
also Split Screen, also in the beginning of a new era, because we finished Boys Over Flowers a little while ago, and we're now watching Coffee Prince alongside My Hero Academia. Plus a sprinkling of other stuff on the blog. Maybe we'll do some year-end stuff. Depends on how motivated we are. Mm-hmm. Who knows? Let's see. The most important thing, of course, is that you should subscribe to the show if you don't ever want to miss an episode. We are on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spotify, Pandora Podcasts on the web and on the app, Overcast, Pocket Casts, anywhere you can find podcasts, you can almost certainly find Talk This. So next week I think it's going to be our end of year episode, right?
Good.
I see you frantically trying to figure out what games we pulled.
I definitely remember what games we pulled, but, you know.
If we ever remember the games for the following week, it will be a sign that we have been replaced with intelligent robots.
Yes, it will. Without me having to go look at the website on the side. But after next week, when we do sort of like a year-end, year-in-the-decade thing, we'll either be doing a side quest or a full episode after that.
We've still got to have a strategy meeting for the first episode of 2020.
Yeah.
But next week, look forward to our takes on games of the year, games of the decade, what games did we play, sharing from our Might into Nintendo years in review, games we hated, games that should have come out, games that would have come out.
Did I play Iconoclast this year? No, right?
I don't know. You played Iconoclast for a long time and hated it for a real long time, but I don't... No, I'm thinking of Octopath Traveler, not Iconoclast.
No, I didn't play it this year, because I played Iconoclast before I played Octopath Traveler. That was just a rough couple of months for me.
So that's a preview of the kind of analysis you can expect if you tune in next week.
It really said something about me that as soon as you said games we didn't like, I was like, when did I play Iconoclasts? God.
So folks, thanks for tuning in. From both of us here at Talk This, have a happy holidays. We hope you're having a restful holiday season. You've got all your gifts if you need them. And that you're eating some good food.
You know, it's a great gift. Telling your family about the podcast.
Yeah. Here's our well wish this week. If you're looking for a last minute gift suggestion, you can just kind of put the URL to the website.
Just print it out on a piece of paper and just fold it, put it in an envelope.
Do origami with it if you want.
Here you go. That's all you need. Hours worth of entertainment, honestly.
Seriously, there is a backlog. So on that note, folks, we hope that you have a happy what day is it kind of holiday season.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll see you next week for our last podcast of the decade.
Woo!